The Winnipeg Jets prospect pool for skaters has only grown in talent, and on tonight's episode, we are breaking down tiers A through C for some of their top 10 skater prospects.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at AgeOfLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. More than anything, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Especially tonight, we've got a fun one for you. A lot of you are probably looking at this offseason, and you might not be that excited. But in my mind, even if this offseason doesn't have a ton of big movement, I am extremely excited about the upcoming training camp and preseason in just a couple of months. I know it doesn't seem like it's all that close because we're not even through the Cup finals yet, but I promise you August and September will roll around before you even realize it, and we'll be back in Penticton. We'll be seeing a lot of the young guns for the Jets, and I think Winnipeg has a very well-rounded, very interesting prospect group. And to try and tackle some of the skater questions, who reigns supreme in the system? Where do folks kind of fit in the talent tier tree, if you want to call it that? I've thought of about 10 of Winnipeg's top skater prospects, and I've attempted to rank them from A, B, and C tiers. Now, each of these tiers corresponds to, maybe projectability, what I think their potential for NHL talent is, and it doesn't mean that they're a bad prospect if they're in the lower tiers. It just means that they may need a little more seasoning and work before they finally reach that. Of course, we're going to start off with the A tier, but before we did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, just like making a bet when you draft a prospect, you are taking a bit of a shot in the dark sometimes. Oftentimes, though, you've got good scouts to identify some really good tool sets, and that shot in the dark is going to be a little more educated. And with Winnipeg, I think they've generally gotten the hang of drafting some pretty good prospects. Now, their A tier is a very interesting one, and perhaps a slight bit controversial. We're not going to have Brad Lambert in the A tier. First off, we're going to be starting instead with Elias Salomonsson. Now, Salo is probably a name that a lot of you are already familiar with, and in terms of Jets defenders, I don't think he really has an equal in our prospect system. There is another name that's in the C tier that maybe you could consider a close-ish analog to, but Salomonsson, in my mind, is one of the most talented defenders the Jets have ever drafted. He's strong, he's mature, he plays well above his age, which, yes, you will watch him with the Moose. You'll see him be impetuous with decision-making and stuff. You'll notice that he does have some turnovers. He'll make risky plays and choices. But you have to understand, he's a young, early 20s guy in his first North American season, and yet he was one of Manitoba's top scorers. For a young Swedish defender who also missed quite a bit of time this year due to an injury, it's really unusual to find him settling in so quickly and adapting to North American ice as fast as he was. But quite honestly, I did think that he had the ability to reach this level very quickly. One thing that's always stood out with him when he came into camp, and even from some of his SHL days, was that he does play a very mature game. He's been a pro for several years now, and you start to realize that he just mentally and I guess emotionally plays the game at a much older level than you would think. He has a few years of experience ingrained in the way that he thinks about the ice. He's got great vision. He's got great skating. He's a dynamo on the back end with a great shot and smart passing instincts. And I just wasn't really expecting him to already be such a prolific attacking blue liner. But he's shown that there is quite a bit of potential with him. I have him in the A tier because I really do feel like he has potentially first pairing ability. This is a guy who in a couple of years, I easily think the Jets have him next to Morrissey. It just seems to be the natural track, right? And they may ask him to be a little bit less aggressive, although, if you're looking at Morrissey maybe slowing down a little bit over the next few years, perhaps Salomonson's going to be that guy, the more offensively minded player, while perhaps Morrissey starts to adopt some more DeMello-like responsibilities. So there's a lot of opportunity here. Salomonson has been known to be a very strong two-way presence in previous iterations of his form, and he's just continuing to grow. He's getting better, and I really feel like the Jets envision him being the number two alongside Morrissey. The Jets just don't have that many elite right-sided D prospects, and he could be one of their crown jewels in the system. There aren't many players in the pool that I would say are untouchable, but Salomonson might as well be. He's one of our most exciting prospects, and I can't wait to see what he becomes. The next prospect in our A tier is Braden Yeager. Now, I know Yeager has some question about his ultimate ceiling, and I think in a lot of ways he projects to be a very good middle six center. I know a lot of people have already anointed him the 2C of the future. I myself kind of think that that's where he's tracking. I just wonder, once he reaches the NHL, how much of his offensive potential is really going to be put on display. In camp, he was mature. He played a really strong two-way game. I thought he back-checked well. His defensive positioning and interceptions and forced turnovers were nice. I saw a lot to like in his game. And obviously for Team Canada, for the juniors and stuff, a lot of people will say that they didn't have that impressive of a tournament, but I don't really read into that stuff. I want to see what he's like when he's in his more consistent, more routine environments. And in the juniors, he's been really good. So I think that there's a real interesting player there. Again, the tool sets may have some limitations with just how much will be, elite offensive potential. His release is elite. In terms of, the creativity and stuff and really the high-end technical skill, I don't know if he has as much of that. His game, can be a little more reliant on that shot and perhaps just finding softer spaces between defenders, but I think he does project to be a very clear NHLer. I think that he plays a more mature game for his age, and I do think that there is a real chance coming out of camp next season that he is closer to an NHL spot than a lot of folks might imagine. I don't know if he'll get a starting spot necessarily. It really depends on what happens with this coming off season, and I don't think the Jets really want to throw him in immediately, but if he impresses during preseason, at the very least, I expect him to be a very late cut. I would think he's probably one of the last demotions. So, keep him in mind. I think that he very much projects to be a really good NHLer. I think for what Winnipeg needs, he's more of a better fit than McGroarty was. And so I'm excited to see him. I very much want to see what he's like in camp and preseason. I have him very high on this list. One of our best prospects, and very clearly somebody who, while he may have some caps to his total offensive potential, maybe he doesn't have the crazy McDavid or McKinnon skill. What he does have is a lot of defensive maturity, a great forechecking presence, and an elite release. So there is a lot to like. Now, the last guy who's got in my A tier is partly because I think that there's maybe a little more to Chibrikov than maybe meets the eye. He has been a prolific scorer in almost every level that he's played in, whether it was overseas or in North America. Had he not been injured this year, he would have been crazy for the Moose, and honestly, he should have been up with the Jets. I thought he looked the most ready among our fringe NHL prospects during this past preseason in camp. He seemed like he could actually do the job, and he actually did score a couple of NHL goals. So he's kind of on the cusp for me of graduating to that next level. He's almost not a prospect, but because he kind of still is and really hasn't had a full NHL ride just yet, I have him still in this prospect tier. I think he's going to be a very good middle to potentially top six winger. I'm curious to know how the Jets will deploy him. I think the most natural fit is to replace Appleton on the third line and help out Lowry with some really good offensive potential and finishing talent. He's got a relentless motor. He's a great skater. I think that he will be a very big impact player for this team, and he's the exact kind of guy that Winnipeg really needs more of in their top nine. So get excited for Chibrikov as well. Obviously out of this tier, he's the most likely to make the Jets in this coming season. I very much project him to be a third or perhaps even second liner, depending on what happens with, the Jets acquisitions and trades and what they do at the draft. So Shubrakov very much is going to be a Jet. I'm excited about him, and I hope you are too. Now, obviously, the next tier has some more work to do, right? These are guys who are perhaps a little newer to the Jets prospect pool, or maybe they haven't quite yet seized and taken the reins the way that I think Winnipeg and its fan base have expected. We'll chat about this tier in just a brief moment. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, it's not just the NBA playoffs. I'm not as big of a basketball fan myself, but a lot of you are probably going to be tuning into the Stanley Cup Finals. And if you think you know who's going to win between McDavid and Barkov, this is your chance to win big. Maybe you think McDavid's going to have a 3-point night in game 1 or 2. Maybe you think Barkov is going to show defensive resilience and earn a positive on-ice rating compared to his peers. No matter what, you can do all of this and bet on these great player stat lines or even combine them for same-game parlays to win an even bigger bonus. So if you're also a new user, this is a really great time to get in on the action. If you head to FanDuel.com right now to sign up and place your first $5 bet, you could win up to $200 in bonus bets if that $5 bet wins. It's a great opportunity. It's a great way to start winning and perhaps getting even more cash to bet on further props and odds. Make yourself your own Stanley Cup champion and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're ranking tiers of Jets skater prospects. You might notice that I have conspicuously ignored goalies for now. Goalies to me are voodoo. Obviously, DiVincentis and Milic are among our top prospects, but I think for the sake of sticking to what is a little more projectable and a little easier to figure out, we're going to start with the skaters, right? Maybe we do goalies a different night, but we talked about the A tier, right? Shibrakov, Salomonson, Jaeger. What about the B tier? Does this B team have issues? Why are they in this tier? Well, I think the first way to think about this is that the B tier either has a little more to show in needing to be dominant, or perhaps they're newer arrivals to this pool, or maybe they've even earned some promotion, right, from the previous tier. And I think the perfect example of all of this is Brad Lambert. Lambert has probably bounced up and down the rankings in the Jets pool more than any other prospect. People just can't really get a handle on who he is and what he's capable of. His NHL stint so far has looked okay. I don't think he looked out of place, but I do feel like you were looking for him to be more assertive. And as he started to finally get a little more confidence at the NHL level, he then got returned back down to the Moose. And so with the Moose this past year, his numbers looked grim on paper. But when you look at how Manitoba actually scored, the record of goal scoring for that team and the general offensive approach, which was just dire, if we're being real, Lambert actually was one of their top performers. He had a consistent hand in assisting tons of goals. He was one of their top points performers. And for a team that was very anemic on the attack, Lambert at least provided a level of threat. Unfortunately for him, the shooting percentage really took a nosedive, and I don't know if there was maybe an underlying injury that just wasn't publicized, or if it was just confidence, maybe some puck luck. Very hard to tell. Either way, I think what happened with him this year is a bit of an anomaly. I kind of blame it more on the Moose just being awful than anything. And so for me, what he does in preseason is kind of going to be a make or break moment. He needs to prove that he's ready to take on an NHL role. And if he can't, you're looking more likely at some sort of a trade for some very present, very near-term help. As much as I love Lambert and as much as I am probably willing to give him more leash than a lot of other people might, there comes a point at which the Jets are in their competitive window, and if Lambert can't seize the moment this coming summer and upcoming season, then it might be time for the Jets to figure out if there's another team who's willing to swap and bring in some more immediate NHL help. I think Lambert is very talented. I do believe that there is a role for him here in Winnipeg. I just don't know if he's going to find it in time. So, with him having a weird season and a lot of the chaos with his performances the last couple of years, partly more environment focused than maybe other prospects, I've got him in the B tier. I think he could very easily slide back up into the A tier, but I just need to see more from him this coming season. Also in the B tier, you've got Dmitry Reshevsky. Now, Reshevsky's put up very respectable numbers for an early 20s skater in Russia. He's been one of Moscow's better finishers and actually is their goal scorer of record for the past couple of years. And I don't really know how his game's going to translate to the NHL. I don't think he has like the craziest, most explosive skating, but he does tend to find really soft areas of the ice. He's got very good vision. I feel like he likes to attack from those face-off circles, and he just seems to be, a positive contributor on offense. Maybe he's the second pass right before the goal scorer, or perhaps he's finishing off an opportunity himself. I feel like he's a tertiary guy, and maybe it's going to take a higher end center to bring out the best in him, but he could be an intriguing wild card. I do feel that because of his production and talent level, I've got him ranked fairly highly in the Jets pool, but how this all kind of pans out, whether he comes over or stays in Russia, could slide him, either up or down, depending what happens in preseason. But for now, let's keep in the B tier. I think he's got some intrigue. I really want to see what he does in camp this year. And based on his pro numbers overseas, there's real reason to believe that he could be almost an internal rental and an internal upgrade. So keep an eye on Reshevsky for camp if he comes over. Very excited about him. The last two players in the B tier are both really fun picks in my mind. Kevin He, the first one, we've chatted with him before in an earlier point of the season when he was on that really crazy points tear. Obviously, what he did was pretty unsustainable, and eventually his points totals definitely took a bit of a dive, relatively speaking. He was putting up like 2 points per game for the start of the year, and it eventually settled down to a more normal-looking 1.2. But Kevin's got that dog in him, and I don't just mean because he's on the Ice Dogs. He's a relentless player. He's got a great motor, tons of leadership ethic. I feel like his ability to time his shots well and to know when somebody's vulnerable makes him a great scorer. I think he's a very pesky player. The only thing with him, and kind of why I'm looking at it as more of like the second tier for now, is you want to see him maybe develop some of those elite tool sets a little more, right? He doesn't have like the world's hardest shot, and maybe there's like a level of technical skill that you want him to keep perfecting. But I do feel he's one of those players who's going to be maybe a little bit of a slow burner, but somebody who, even if it takes some time to start really finding the score sheet at the pro level, he'll still be a positive contributor, one way or another. I think he's going to be great in the locker room. I think he's got a great motor. He will be very fast and attack those forechecking areas. I think he'll be a pest in the corners, trying to force turnovers, create good offense out of the counter. There's just a lot to his game that's already there, and now it's kind of adding those elite finishing talent and touches to make him a next level threat at the NHL or even the AHL level. I think his pro career is going to be fun. I think he'll be a fan favorite, and I'm very excited for him. Now, the last guy in this B tier is a player who, in my mind, is actually on the fringes of reaching the very top of the Jets pool, and that's Kieron Walton. Walton has had one of the most meteoric rises we've ever seen from a prospect, and in some ways, when he talks about modeling his game after Tage Thompson, you also see it in his transformation year over year. Last year, he looked like a huge, intriguing winger/center, more winger than anything, with some, potential skating challenges, but a great head on the shoulders, very smart offensively, fantastic passer, and an absolute menace down low in front of goal. This year, he took that to an absolutely comical level and even earned himself an ATO with the Moose. It was, or actually it might have been a PTO, but it was just an incredible year for him with the Sudbury Wolves. He was fantastic, putting up almost 1.4 points per game, and he just could not be stopped. He's a smooth skater, still a little bit sluggish, but he's working on it and getting better. And just generally that offensive presence that he has, he's got elite hand-eye coordination, a great shot, and super, super smart offensive instincts. He just seems to identify passing and shooting lanes before they develop. And if all of it starts to really translate to the next level, Walton could be one of the best home run picks the Jets have ever gotten, especially considering where he was taken. He was a super late pick. I have a lot of time for him, and I would not be shocked if by this time next year he's in the A tier or even above that if we start to get into S tier conversations. But he is a super fascinating prospect. I think he's going to be a big impact NHLer, and look out for him. He is one of our hottest prospects in the system. Now, we have one last tier to cover here. That is the C tier. And these are guys who, for one reason or another, have either fallen a little bit out of favor with the system and maybe don't rank as highly as they did initially when they were first drafted, or they've still got some real development to do and are relatively newcomers to this prospect pool. We'll chat about tier C for the Jets prospects in one brief moment. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's closing thoughts as we are chatting about C tier of Winnipeg skater prospects. And, I talked a lot about A and B and sort of the differences between A being maybe the most pro-ready or most projectable, B tier needing some work. C tier has a more significant development curve or perhaps declines in performance from what we'd normally expect. And if you're talking about declines in performance, you probably know where I'm going with this. Colby Barlow and Jacob Julien have both taken considerable step backs from what I think people were really expecting. The difference was Barlow kind of figured it out in the OHL playoffs this year. Julien has kind of done some of the same, but for the most part, I think both guys really haven't quite found their footing. And, with Barlow, I think it sort of speaks to some of the concerns I had this past year with his development track. There were moments during the season where he just really wasn't using his shot much. And rather than being, that prolific goal scorer, he tried to do maybe too much and wasn't really a noticeable creator at 5v5. And so now, he's ripping shots left and right. He's been a much more noticeable presence. And so, it seems like he's rediscovered his form. But I think for me, with Barlow, I still have questions about what his NHL career might be. You could make him an insulated middle six kind of forward with a great shot. Maybe he kind of becomes like a Drew Stafford sort of player. That's kind of where I get this vibe of him, translating to. He's got some skating challenges, and I feel like maybe the decision-making and stuff is kind of off somehow. I don't quite know how to describe it. You don't really see many players with his profile scoring as many points as he does, but having the curious kind of limitations that he also seems to possess. So he is a really interesting one. I don't know if he's really long for the Jets system or if he's going to be one of those players that when the Jets try and trade for a center, they maybe move Barlow out. He's been talked about as a future captain type. And so maybe he carves out a career as like a Boone Jenner sort of player where perhaps his numbers don't jump off the page, but he eventually starts to really hit his stride as a strong forechecker and a guy who can, maybe grind into those dirty areas and sneak a bit of a snipe here and there. So very intriguing one. I don't know really how I feel about him personally, other than that, I just don't know if he's going to be the kind of guy who eventually hits the top six, but you never want to write anyone off. You always have prospects who are late bloomers, and maybe he eventually sorts it out and adds that layer of skill that, you wanted to see from him. Julien, on the other hand, I feel a little bit better about. Now, Julien, obviously last year he really had an offensive explosion. This year it sort of died on the vine. And while his numbers aren't terrible for the sort of season that he's in where he's about to make the jump to pro pretty soon, you'd have thought that he would have continued his success from last year and grown his game. But it actually went the reverse direction. I'm not as worried about it in some ways. Based on what we saw with camp and preseason, I do feel like he's going to be a very solid bottom six player. He's got the defensive awareness. He'll back check aggressively. He's strong on the puck. I don't worry about that. I just wonder if his offense is not going to be as much of a factor. Maybe he gets 10 to 15 or even 20 points a season, but that offensive explosion that we had last season might have been more of a mirage. So I don't know what to make of him. I like him as, maybe a really good fourth line player. And, beyond that, we'll see, right? He's going to take some time, maybe to hit a stride at the NHL or even the AHL level. But I do think that he'll still be, in perhaps the same way that Kevin He is, a positive impact player, even if he's not scoring. I think he'll have some great defensive shifts. I think he'll be a strong fourth line player. Just remains to be seen if he can find some of that scoring talent that he was showcasing last year. And again, like I said, in the same vein of Barlow, don't write him off. He might have had a rougher season, but he could be a player to keep an eye on as a sleeper in this pool. Now, the last guy that's interesting to me, and I have him kind of in the C tier because he's still a very raw prospect and is still figuring out the pro game, it's Alphonse Frey. Frey is super talented, and there's no doubt that he's got skating for days. The big thing with him is obviously he's kind of working his way up through the Swedish ranks. He's in the second tier for a good stretch of the season. He's played some with the under-20 team for Björklöven. I hope I pronounced that right. Obviously, players like him take some time to really ramp up in the Swedish pro ranks and really just the European pro ranks. But he has been getting some nice responsibility, slowly working his way up. It's just tough for a young kid who's, probably still working to earn the trust of the coaching staff and will have those youthful, impetuous moments. I put him in the C tier because I think he really does possess some fantastic offensive tools, but it also comes with a lot of growth and development needed in the decision-making, the gapping and spacing, the back checking and all that kind of stuff, right? Like nothing really surprising. I don't know if he projects to be a Jets player at this level, but, with this kind of prospect, it's hard for me to really get super excited because I also see how the Jets tend to look at European smaller defenders who are great skaters and very gifted with the puck movement, but don't have like that size and grit that the team seems to really obsess over. So, with him, I think he could slide very much into the B tier here next season or the year beyond. But for now, let's keep him in the C tier. I want to see his growth coming for next season. Hopefully, he can move his way up the Swedish ranks into maybe some tougher competition and more minutes. But for now, you know what? He's going to be making some adjustments, I'm sure, and working this summer. But probably one of those players that I'm not going to think about too much just yet. But in 2 to 3 years, ask me again. Curious to know how you feel about a lot of these prospects, though. Are there any in these tiers that you feel should go in a different one? Are there other prospects that you want me to talk about or think that I missed? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Tomorrow's episode, I think I want to talk about some of the wild card prospects. And these are guys who are either for one reason or another a little bit under the radar because maybe their programs don't get a lot of coverage. Maybe there's not a lot of footage out there. Scouting information is limited, but they might be players to keep a very close eye on, especially, say, a guy like Garrett Brown, who could become Winnipeg's next Dylan Sandberg. But we'll chat about all of that on tomorrow's show. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening to Locked On Winnipeg Jets, making us your first listen of the day, every day. We will see you here tomorrow, so have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.